At the same time, on the outskirts of Kyoto City, more specifically in the He family's villa, there was a woman named Lian Su, Lane Jaibai's sister, wearing a red dress and sitting on a chair with crossed legs while holding a wine glass in her hand. Lian Su began to move the wine glass, and while looking down at the floor, she asked the man next to her if Lian Jaibai had really died in an accident. The green-haired man who was kneeling before her slightly lifted his head towards her and explained that Master Lian Jaibai had gone with the students from Jaido Martial Arts Academy to participate in the Grand University Martial Arts Tournament. But once the tournament ended, he was challenged by Lu Sheng, one of the 7 saints, and was killed on the spot without leaving any trace behind except for his feet. Lian Su simply turned her head towards the man, and while looking down at the ground, she remained silently listening. While with one hand she was holding the wine glass, she placed the other on the table and stood up with its help. Then she turned her head towards the man, and while looking at him with an incredulous gaze, she explained to him that this was impossible. Her brother was intelligent, intimidated the weak, and feared the strong. She didn't know how it was possible for him to have accepted another great master's challenge. She also added that this was something she knew very well. Upon hearing this, the man lifted his head towards her, and upon seeing her expression, he became nervous. While prostrated before her, he revealed to her that the killer of his brother, named Lu Sheng, was a level 6 warrior. Lan Su couldn't believe what her ears were hearing. Unconsciously, she tightly gripped the wine glass, causing it to slowly crack. She became furious upon hearing that her brother's killer, Lu Sheng, was simply a level 6 warrior. As her body emitted a powerful energy, she turned her head towards him and with a murderous look, asked if this was some kind of joke. Upon hearing this, the man with green hair prostrated himself before her, and while looking down at the ground, he asked her to calm down and listen to him until the end. Upon hearing this, Lan Su had no other choice but to listen to what he had to say. Then, the man revealed to her that during the battle, Lu Sheng suddenly rose from level 6 and became a Grand Master, and for this reason was able to completely annihilate Lian Jaibai, a level 7 master. Upon hearing this, Lan Su lost her composure. She turned her back to the man, and as she was walking away from him, she threw the wine glass to the side, put her hand on her face, and started laughing out loud. She couldn't believe that a level 6 warrior had killed her brother. The man began to stand up, and upon seeing her behavior, he became somewhat confused and surprised at the same time. Lan Su stopped walking, put both hands on her face, and asked the man how it was possible that her brother had been killed by a mere level 6 warrior. Within seconds, she regained her composure, and now instead of laughing out loud, she began to cry for her brother's death. She put both hands on her face, and as tears were falling from her eyes, she started wondering how it was possible that a martial arts genius like Lian Jaibai had lost his life. Lan Su removed her hands from her face, and while she was looking at the landscape, she thought that now that things had reached this point, it was time to take action. She asked the man if he could go on a trip. Upon hearing this, the man who was prostrated before her lifted his head and was somewhat surprised. While Lan Su's body was emitting a suffocating energy and tears were falling from her eyes, she ordered the man to kill Lu Sheng. Feeling her suffocating energy, the green-haired man prostrated himself before her again and explained that killing Lu Sheng was not appropriate. This was because Grand Master Lian Jaibai had been killed during an official combat, and according to the rules of martial arts, one could not blame their opponent if something tragic happened during the fight. Upon hearing this, Lan Su became furious with helplessness. She approached the man, grabbed him by the neck, and while looking into his eyes, asked if her brother had died in vain. At that moment, her phone started vibrating. Immediately, she picked up the phone, and upon reading the message, she fell to her knees on the ground. She lost composure once again, closed her eyes, and began laughing out loud. She couldn't believe that everyone was dead. She grabbed the phone with both hands, and while her body was emitting a powerful energy, with a look of helplessness, she asked the man if he was going to help her. The man simply remained silent, and upon seeing this, she decided to take action on her own. At the same time, in the city, more specifically at one of the schools, the children who were very happy began to go back home with their parents. Not far from the children, there was a man wearing a cap standing next to the trash bin. Upon hearing the laughter of the children, the man turned his head towards them. This man was none other than Fu Jianming, who couldn't help but cry and feel sad. He was looking at a girl with pink hair who had her eyes closed and was happily playing with her friends. This girl reminded Fu Jianming of his late daughter, Fu Zhu. The girl, upon feeling Fu Jianming's gaze, turned her head towards him and was somewhat surprised. Quickly, she and her friend started running. The truth is that Fu Jianming was known as the crazy old man, and the children were fleeing from him to avoid being caught. Poor Fu Jianming decided to ignore the children and went back to his work, searching for some trash in the trash bin. Several seconds later, one of the boys who was with the girl bumped into someone. Upon seeing who this person was, both girls were left speechless. This person was none other than Lu Sheng. He closed his eyes and gave a pleasant smile to the children. Upon seeing his smile, the boy who had collided with him became somewhat confused. While Fu Jianming was picking up plastic bottles from the trash bin, someone called him by his name. This person was Lu Sheng. He started approaching old Fu Jianming and with a smile, he told him that he was here to ask for money. Upon hearing Lu Sheng's voice, Fu Jianming's expression changed drastically. He was in shock. Lu Sheng threw a bag on the ground next to his foot. He had brought what Fu Jianming wanted, so he asked him to take a look and see if it was correct. He was in shock, dropped the bag containing the bottles and cans on the floor, turned his head towards the bag, and started wondering if Lu Sheng had really succeeded. Without wasting a single second, he sat on the ground and prepared to open the bag. At that moment, Lu Sheng approached him and told him that according to rumors, it was said that a great master could not be humiliated. Even if they died, their body could not be cut into pieces like pork. Fu Jianming approached the bag, put his hand on the zipper, and slowly began to open it. Upon fully opening the bag and seeing its contents, he was in shock. Inside, there was the head of Lian Jiabai's son, the kidnapper and murderer of his daughter. Lu Sheng explained to him that because he had no other choice, he could only bring the head of this bastard. After saying this, Lu Sheng pulled out a picture of Fu Jianming, in which he was with his deceased wife and their two late daughters. Lu Sheng handed him the photo, put his hand in his pocket, and while looking into his eyes, started to smile and asked him to keep it. While he was sitting on the ground with both knees, he stopped looking at what was inside the backpack, lifted his head slightly towards Lu Sheng, and upon seeing the photograph, he became paralyzed. He took the photo with both hands, and upon seeing his two daughters and his beloved wife, he couldn't help but cry. He placed the photo on his chest, lowered his head, clenched his teeth tightly, and started crying even more. Now that Lu Sheng had finished his task, he began to distance himself from him. Upon seeing this, Fu Jianming prostrated himself before Lu Sheng, and with tears flowing endlessly from his eyes, thanked him. Lu Sheng turned his back on him, and as he walked away, he waved goodbye with one hand and put the other in his pants pocket, replying that there was no need to thank him. Several hours later, it began to get dark and all the city lights turned on. Lu Sheng climbed onto the roof of a building, and while he was watching the sun setting, he made a call to Vice Director Zhao and explained that he had already finished everything he had to do. Zhao asked him to return quickly. He had already informed Master Washeng, who was willing to officially accept Lu Sheng as his disciple and commit to protecting him from all dangers coming from the Jai Dao Martial Academy. Lu Sheng put the phone to his ear, remained silent for several seconds, and then replied that he was not going to come back. Upon hearing this, Zhao, who was on the other end of the call, became somewhat confused and asked what he meant by this. Lu Sheng knew that Zhao must be in his office. Upon hearing this, Zhao became somewhat confused. Lu Sheng told him that he remembered that his office had a huge window from floor to ceiling. Lu Sheng was right, Zhao was sitting in his office. Lu Sheng asked him to turn his head back and look through the window. He obeyed, turned his head back, and saw the tall tower. Lu Sheng, who was also staring at the tower, asked him if he knew what he had to do to become a martial saint. Lu Sheng revealed to him that in the future he would become the supreme warrior and destroy the tall tower so that everyone could praise him. After saying this, Lu Sheng hung up the call. In front of him was Washeng. Zhao tried to explain to him what Lu Sheng was planning to do, but Washeng interrupted him and told him that if Lu Sheng didn't want to be his disciple, then it was better to forget about it. Upon hearing this, Zhao began to stand up. While Washeng was stroking his beard with one hand, he put the other behind his back, started approaching him, and asked him not to have any regrets towards Lu Sheng since he had his own path to follow. It just wasn't the same as theirs. Washeng approached him, and while looking into his eyes, he told him that despite Lu Sheng's ridiculous and childish idea, it was good. He put both hands behind his back, turned his head to the side, and while looking at the tall tower, he told Zhao that it had been a long time since he had seen a martial arts disciple as interesting as Lu Sheng. Zhao lowered his head before him, placed his hand on his chest, closed his eyes and explained to him that after all, it had been their fault that Lu Sheng messed with the Jidao family. He knew that Washeng better than anyone knew Lan Su's character. She wouldn't give up so easily until she killed Lu Sheng. Upon hearing this, Wusheng turned his head towards him and told him that since this was a choice Lu Sheng had made, naturally he should be aware of the consequences and be ready to fully assume them. After saying this, he turned his back on him and thought that what Zhao was saying also made sense, so he asked him to let Huiyu protect Lu Sheng's family. With her there, his family would be safe. Zhao simply bowed his head before him and remained silent. As Wu Sheng walked away from him, he closed his eyes and explained that as for the others, it was unnecessary to say more. While Zhao had his hand on his chest and bowed his head before Wu Sheng, he opened his eyes and while looking at the ground, asked Lu Sheng to destroy the tower, as the only thing he could do for him was this. Wu Sheng opened the office door and left. At the same time, outside, the sun began to set. While Lu Sheng had both hands in his pants pocket and was staring at the tall tower, he thought about the consequences of rejecting Wusheng as his master. At that time, he had not chosen to reject the kindness of provincial governor Xia Pingnan. But this time, however, he was rejecting Wusheng Tan Zhongyu, who surpassed Xia Pingnan by millions of times. To do this, it really required a lot of courage. While Lu Sheng had his hands in his pants pockets, he turned his head towards the tall tower, and while staring at it intently, he thought that after all, under the command of the martial master, he was only going to be the second martial master. What he had to do was surpass martial master Wu Sheng and have absolute power to bring everything down. Lu Sheng took his hand out of his pocket, extended it towards the tall tower, and while making a grabbing gesture, he thought that only in this way would he be able to save the world. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, then don't forget to subscribe and like the video.